Welcome to Wage Cucking with JMO.
Welcome to another episode of Wage Cucking with JMO, the shitcoin.com podcast. Today we're joined by Arjun, who is the head of ecosystem at Mantle, which is a layer 2 powered by BitDAO. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Can you give me a little bit about your background in crypto and how you got into the Mantle project specifically?
Sure, definitely. So I've been in the crypto space since 2016. So that's when I think it was. I remember, in fact, almost exactly. It was I think 20th May 2016 when I first read the Bitcoin white paper, and that's kind of how it started for me. I think I was very sort of enthralled by the idea of decentralization, not so much the payments part. Of course, that was interesting in itself, but this just whole idea of of building a decentralized world. So I think that was something very exciting for me. And I've been sort of following the space since then. So I sort of started working full time in cryptos in about July 2020. That's when I joined Polygon as sort of head of growth and BD, and I did that for about 2.5 years. And then post that, I met the team, which was building Mantle, and I got a chance to talk to them, and I just found it a very interesting problem to solve. So then I sort of ended up joining the Mantle team, and now I head the ecosystem here.
Okay, very cool. So you were at Polygon for a few years before you got into Mantle.
Yeah, I was at Polygon prior to this, almost 2.5 years, I think. Yeah.
Okay, well, Polygon's also a pretty interesting project. They have their issues as well, but that they seem to be doing pretty well today. So I wanted to kick this. I want to kick this discussion off with a general layer 2 discussion, because if you look at the Ethereum ecosystem right now, there are quite a few layer 2s that are popping up and gaining a decent amount of traction. I'd say the two biggest ones are Arbitrum and Optimism. Optimism being an optimistic rollup that I believe is similar to what Mantle is doing. But then you have like a bunch of layer 2s that are sort of project or specifically allocated for something. Like, for example, Ronin is a layer 2 for like the Axie Infinity game. Something like Immutable X is designed for blockchain gaming and blockchain NFTs. I guess the first question is, with all these general approaches to layer 2s and so many of them popping up, how do you see the future of Ethereum in terms of which layer 2s gain adoption, which ones don't, and so forth?
Got it. Great question. So again, like if you look at rollups broadly, right? So there are like a couple of different ways of looking at rollups, right? So one would be from a technology lens, right? So this is where you have like some Arbitrum and Optimism, which are optimistic rollups. And then what we're also seeing these days, we are also seeing the sort of the surge behind ZK rollups, right? So for a long period of time, people have been talking about zero knowledge rollups. There've been testnets.
I think right now there's a huge narrative for specifically ZK rollups, at least in the past like week or 2 weeks. Like a lot of the ZK based, the ZK rollup tokens have been going through the roof. But go on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so I'll tell you where the excitement also comes from, right? So this is something which we've also kind of looked into. So I think when rollup technology was like sort of first being discussed, right, and you had optimistic rollups, sort of going live per se, with Arbitrum, Optimism, they've been around for some time now, and I've seen some decent adoption. ZK rollups was always thought of as a problem, which in some sense was the ultimate solution, like very high security, very high throughput, but was just technologically like really difficult to solve, right? And people always felt it was like 4 or 5 years away, and that's kind of like was the general thought process. But what we've kind of seen, and this is something our internal researchers have also verified, right, by looking at some of the code in the market and by talking to some of the founders of these ZK rollup sort of projects, is that the delta between the performance, between optimistic rollups and ZK rollups, like the delta has been continuously reducing over a period of time, right? So ZK rollups have been slowly getting better and better, and it's come to this point where I think in 2023 or possibly maybe even the next couple of months, we'll see many of these ZK rollups go into production, right, where there'll be mainnets now, right? And I think that's why there's a lot of excitement around this, because I think the best part about ZK rollups also is that there's not just there's a bunch of investment which has gone into some of these rollup projects, but the fact that there are 6 or 7 different teams trying to solve the same problem, like there's a very high chance that in some sense it gets cracked, right? And then ZK rollups become a reality, and then you're able to have like then the best of both worlds, which is high scalability, like with very high transaction throughput, etc., but at the same time, also very high security, where I think some of the problems which optimistic rollups have had, like a 7-day exit period, right, where it takes like
Yeah.
7 days to exit funds, and there are a couple of ways in which projects have solved that by having, like, let's say, liquidity bridges like hop protocol, etc.
Yeah.
But as such, there's a 7-day exit period. Now, with
Uh-huh.
zero knowledge technology, with ZK rollups, it would be immediate, right? The moment the transaction, like the smart contract on Ethereum is verified that the transaction from layer two, it's done.
Yeah.
Right. So from that perspective, like, there's a very high sort of degree of security and performance which you're able to suddenly bring to the table, and that's kind of why, like, there's this big narrative going on, because I feel that some of these chains are very close to going into mainnet, and then we're going to see now this advent of ZK rollups in 2023.
Yeah, I think specifically ZK Sync. I don't know if they're already in testnet right now, but I think that's the one that's gotten the most hype. But yeah, you mentioned the lead up period for transfer of assets, and I think that's like a pretty big problem in terms of people that want to participate in specifically decentralized finance protocols. It's never great to have your funds on a bridge for like 7-8 days. It takes quite a bit of your return away when you have funds locked up. So it's an interesting problem to solve.
100%. And to an extent, the same problem is for, like, let's say, going from chain to chain as well. So you could use a ZK bridge sort of methodology for sort of moving across multiple other chains in a more secure manner.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like, so it's kind of extends itself to that use case as well, which is kind of what makes it, like, that much more exciting.
Wage Cucking with JMO.
So I wanted to talk specifically about the Mantle design. So from what I understand, the Mantle is an optimistic rollup, but it has a modular design that allows for ease of access of projects building on top of it. Do you want to go into further detail about exactly what Mantle is doing?
Sure, definitely. So Mantle is a layer 2 or an Ethereum layer 2 rollup. So essentially, if you look at what we're building at Mantle, so Mantle is a project which has been incubated by BitDAO, right? And BitDAO is amongst, like, it's the largest DAO in the Web3 space. Now, the entire DAO treasury is on Ethereum. So again, we were very Ethereum aligned, wanted to build something which is an open, permissionless ecosystem. So from a design perspective, it just made sense to go with like a rollup design. Now, for the testnet phase, we've come up with the optimistic rollup sort of design, and what we've done is we've kind of iterated on optimistic rollups and tried to solve some of the problems. So number one would be, we tried to sort of we've gone ahead with a modular architecture. So what that means is that transaction processing, the prover, sequencer, finality model, and also data availability, like, these are all separate layers. So for data availability, we've sort of gone ahead with EigenLayer. Like, although EigenLayer as a project is in alpha, like, we've gone ahead and integrated it just so that we could see how developers would leverage data availability layer, what kind of performance benefits it would bring to the table. At the same time, on the fraud proof side, we're doing some interesting research with specular fraud proofs and other kinds of mechanisms, and this is kind of where we've also come up with this new innovation by using multi-party computation. So we sort of paired multi-party computation with a TSS signature scheme, right, to sort of reduce the amount of time it takes to exit from L2 to L1 using optimistic rollup. So think of it this way, where you've got sequencers producing like a proof, and then you've got this independent body of nodes, these multi-party computation nodes, which are also sort of creating the same proof, right? And then you sort of cross-check whether the proof is correct or not, and that's when it goes to the L1 Ethereum chain. So whatever proof your sequencers have created, it's like kind of been double checked, and then eventually subject to also the decentralization of the MPC node network. So with this, we feel that there is a higher security guarantee, and what that means is that the 7-day exit period possibly could come down to 3 days. So we've taken the design of optimistic rollups, and we've kind of made some iterative improvements. However, we want to go into mainnet by Q2 of this year, possibly end of Q2, Q3 is kind of when we're looking at it. And what our researchers have also been doing internally, right, is also been looking at ZK rollups. So we're trying to evaluate whether it makes sense for us to go with ZK rollups when it comes to mainnet, simply because the technology is now crossed a point where we've got a high degree of EVM equivalence, where for the developer it'll be like super easy, but at the same time you can get performance benefits. So that's like an active point of research our team is like looking into right now. So that's kind of what we're trying to build at Mantle. And I think what makes us unique in some sense, right? So there's so many chains out there, so many rollup chains as well.
Mhm.
I think what makes Mantle very unique is that we're a community governed, community owned chain. So for all critical decisions when it comes to the chain, we would have the bit token holders like voting on it.
Yeah.
The same community behind
Uh-huh.
BitDAO, and
Yeah.
we'll also be using the bit token as gas fees. So we'll be building
Uh-huh.
all sorts of interesting utility around the bit token. And I think if you look at the entire ecosystem which we have, which is like BitDAO, the DAO, all the companies BitDAO has invested in, like
Yeah.
ZKDAO, EdgeDAO,
Yeah.
Game7, and then you've
Yeah.
got Bybit, the exchange as well, which seeded
Yeah.
BitDAO, and then we've got Mirana Ventures, the venture arm
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Bybit,
Yeah.
which is an LP in all of these different funds. So from an
Uh-huh.
ecosystem perspective, right, we've got a very unique mix of a pool of liquidity, which is the DAO, an exchange, a venture arm, and a host of other companies which comprise this ecosystem, right? Which, if you're building on Mantle as a project, you get access to this from day zero, right? So we
Yeah.
can take projects all the way from 0 to 100, which is like projects come, get a grant, get investments, and if they show very high potential and are able to achieve like some level of success, then we can take them all the way for to listing, right? And
Uh-huh.
at an ecosystem like standpoint, like this is something which literally nobody else can offer you
Yeah.
outside of maybe like maybe Binance to an
Uh-huh.
extent, but outside of that, like nobody else.
Binance doesn't have like a fund set up like BitDAO is set up. So for those who don't
100%.
know, BitDAO is a DAO. Essentially, the token holders that hold Bit get to vote on what the DAO funds are allocated to, and Bybit, the exchange, contributes 2.5 basis points of their reported trade volume to the DAO. So as long as the exchange continues to do volume, there's quite a bit of funds in there, and then there's specific earmarked funds for various projects like the ZK rollups, like Game7 is run by Wind Ranger Labs, I believe. It's like Bybit's VC arm, and I think they have a couple million or $100 million into blockchain gaming. So like, there's quite a bit of funding for ecosystem-driven products.
100%.
So you bring up the testnet, and from what I understand, you just said the testnet isn't really for bug testing, but more for research and like exploratory issues. Like, is Mantle not set on the final design of their chain? Are they just exploring options right now?
So currently, so again, the most important thing for us is to bring the best technology to the developers. Like that's kind of a responsibility, and that's the advantage of having a testnet, which is that you can also sort of get developer feedback, try new innovations. So which is why, like, our team also wanted to look at ZK rollups, and we didn't want to sort of, let's say, fix on one particular design and then not be able to iterate and improve on it, right? So this is kind of the thought process we had when we were building out our testnet. But also the model of ecosystem development, right, when it comes to Mantle is rather unique, right? So we're bringing a very unique model to the ecosystem, a model which I think like more teams should follow when it comes to sort of ecosystem building and building technology. So I'll just try and like explain it in a quick 5 minutes that if you look at all the blockchains at large, right, in general, if you just zoom out, whether it's layer 1, layer 2, like all blockchains at the end of the day are trying to solve two main problems, right? So everybody's trying to build the best technology, right, which again, like, tends to be very expensive. You need like big research teams, you need like big tech teams. So everybody's trying to build the best technology. And at the same time, everyone is trying to build the biggest ecosystem, right? So people are trying to solve two problems at the same time. And building ecosystem as well is also expensive, right? You need marketing, business development, incentives. So at the end of the day, you've got two very expensive problems, right? Both are orthogonal in nature, right? So the way you build technology and the way you build ecosystem is very different. And so you got two problems, but you've got only one treasury to solve both these problems, right? And if you, for example, and then what happens with projects, right, who are trying to solve two of these, both these problems simultaneously, essentially
There's
trying to solve
trade-offs,
everything
right?
themselves.
There's going to be
Right.
trade-offs between one or the other. Yeah.
There'll be a trade-off, or you're going to basically run out of money, right? Your treasury is going to be under immense strain if you're trying to do two things or basically everything at the same time. And there's evidence of this on chain, right? So if you go back to the previous bull cycle, and if you look at the two outliers of adoption, like if you look at Solana, if you look at Polygon, and if you look at the Sol token and the Matic token, you'll kind of see that if you count all the vesting, everything, the token float is tending to, let's say, 90% or probably 90 to 95%. And what that essentially means is that in one cycle, a huge amount of your treasury has already been expended, right, into the market. And as such, you're trying to build technology which is supposed to, the best case scenario, like outlive all of us.
Yeah.
Right. So clearly this model where everybody is trying to solve everything at the same time possibly may not be the best way to build this ecosystem. And at Mantle, we want to follow a different approach, right? So we want to use our treasury, right, to sort sort of, I would say, like use our treasury to go closer and closer to the user, right? So we want to build utility of the bit token across like DeFi, NFT, gaming, and all the different use cases, and closer to the user. While on the technology side, what we're going to do is we're going to work with a partner, right? So and we're looking at all the different tech stacks like Arbitrum, Optimism, zk Sync, Polygon. Like we're looking at all the different tech stacks, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to run the chain. So we will be running our chain, and then whatever gas fees, etc., we're generating, we would remit this back to the technology provider in this case, right? Who's going to be a tech partner. So there's a clear sort of value accrual from our chain to sort of the team building the chain. And what this means is that I can focus on ecosystem building because I've got my treasury to do that, while the infrastructure company can focus on building pure infrastructure and not worry about business development because they're getting the gas fees from me.
Yeah.
Right. So if you build a big ecosystem, what do? You generate a huge amount of gas fees. You can take that from our chain, right? But what I need in return is that, like, Mantle should have access to the best technology at any given moment of time, right? So we want to basically bring a more collaborative model to the market, right? We want to work with an infrastructure company versus essentially working against everybody, like what's happening right now. And then we would end up burning our entire treasury trying to solve everything at the same time and end up at the same end state, right? Which we've seen in the market. So a collaborative model where teams like DAOs and sort of, let's say, infrastructure companies work together and build the ecosystem together is, in my opinion, like a lot more capital efficient and also like a better way to build the, right? So we want to sort of do this, which is kind of why we're looking at all of these different roll-up designs, because once we finalize on a particular partner, it'll be sort of a combination which is coming to market, and then we'll be able to bring a lot more value because now I don't have to worry about technology, right? I can focus purely on ecosystem building, while the infrastructure company doesn't need to worry about ecosystem building. They can focus purely on infrastructure. So this way there's like very good sort of harmony between the two teams, which are focused now on very specific problems. So instead of having now one treasury to solve everything, you got two treasuries, right? Each very ultra focused on a particular task. And this always
that
would
makes
have a
that makes a lot of sense. So like the two biggest issues I have when looking at alternate layer ones or layer twos, the first being that historically speaking, the most technologically advanced or the best technology doesn't necessarily win market share. And then the second being that a lot of these companies or a lot of these layer one, layer twos, whatever you want to call them, spend a decent amount of their treasury running incentives on their own chain to build up the initial ecosystem, build up the initial growth. But I don't think that's long-term sustainable. Like if you looked at specific projects that have contributed quite a bit to, let's say, decentralized finance incentives, you have a initial rush of users trying to capture the rewards from the funds, but then after that, the ecosystem sort of dies out. So it's an interesting problem for L2s to have in terms of how do we maintain an ecosystem long-term and not just people in it for quick money and then get out and move to the next one. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was your general thoughts on these L2 tokens. You mentioned BitDAO. Specifically, the BIT token is going to be a fee-paying token on the Mantle layer too. If you look at how the current iterations of L1s are designed right now, so for example, let's look at Optimism. There is an Optimism token, but the Optimism token isn't used as a fee-paying token on their L2.
Yes.
Whoa, Wage Cucking with J-Mo.
What do you think the current value proposition for L2 tokens is if they aren't used as fee-paying tokens? And is it something you deem necessary in order to have like longevity for the token?
I do feel that any project which has a token, right, needs to build in like multiple types of value accrual to the token, right? And this is kind of what was our idea at Bit. So it's not just that the Bit token would be used for governance. Like it's still a governance token. You can use it for governance on BitDAO to vote on all of these important proposals. But it would also be used for gas fees. It would also be used as the ecosystem token. So all the DeFi, NFT, gaming, all those projects, right? It would also be used at the infrastructure layer, where at data availability, you would have bit staking to ensure like crypto economic security. So using Mantle, we wanted to build like multiple types of, utility into the token so as to make it, sort of stronger, to make it more valuable with time. And I think this is kind of how like projects also need to look at their token. I think tokens can't be one dimensional, where, for example, you have maybe just governance or for example, public goods funding, or you have maybe one singular type of use case. You
Mhm.
need to have different types of value accrual built into the token mechanism, whether it is through the fees which is being generated, or possibly, like, for example, if you're running like, there are many ideas around this. Like, I'll just maybe talk about a few of them. So for example, if you're running a roll up and you're using ETH as gas fees, maybe you can take, like, I don't know, 1% of all the ETH which is accrued as gas fees, and then use that to maybe buy back your token, or
Yeah,
do
that's
something
smart.
with that.
Yeah.
Right. And then, maybe like sort of give some yield to your token stakers on the network. So there's several ways of looking at like this problem. Each has their own pros and cons, but I think what remains a very clear theory is that a token needs to have multiple types of value accrual, right? Because tokens by nature have very high velocity, right? They're moving around very quickly, much like currency, right? And that's what makes tokens very unique, because you've got currency, you've got equity, and you've got asset rolled into this one construct, right? Which we call token, and which is kind of where, with any high velocity, like kind of a financial instrument like token, you would want to bake in multiple types of utilities, so that it makes sense to hold the token, right? So that the token becomes more valuable with time, so that its use cases increase. So I think that theory is pretty clear, that utility is super important. How you go about doing this at a network level is like I said, like, there are many options. Like, if you're using ETH as gas fees, you can try something else. Like, for us, we want to use BIT as gas fees. So that's like a different mechanism where, for example, like when the transactions are committed to Ethereum, we would swap out BIT for ETH, right? So if you think about it from our perspective, we are also constantly buying ETH in some sense, right? Or spending ETH from the market. So we are contributing to the Ethereum economy.
You're trading bit for ETH in order to pay the L1 fees for
100%, right?
your
And
L2,
then
right?
this sort of, so if you think of it, so it's so interesting, right? So we have our chain, which is then remitting gas fees to a technology partner, which is then like, or the technology stack, and then which is remitting value to the Ethereum ecosystem when it goes to ETH. So there are multiple ways you can think about token utility, but I think every layer 2 network has to focus on multiple types of utility for their token. It can't be one dimensional, and which is why, like, at Bit, our plan was that give it multiple types of utility, and then it would make the the DAO stronger, the community stronger, more impactful. So I think the theory on tokens is pretty clear that way, and there are many ways, like I said, you can maneuver and try and sort of build some utility.
I think you've probably experienced this in your time at Polygon, but I feel like that's a kind of a big problem with the Polygon ecosystem. Is initially it took off, like the total value locked in decentralized finance protocols on Polygon, on the Polygon bridge, was huge due to like incentives and lower gas fees on Polygon. But I think in the past like year and a half or so, it's declined quite rapidly. Is this an issue you see with Mantle, and is there a way you envision like working around it to have long-term users of the chain?
So I think definitely, I think every protocol, and again, people like myself, right, who are at the thick of things at the time, we've all become like sort of, let's say, that much smarter, right? After looking at what happened in the last bull cycle, and how, like, sometimes, some incentives were aligned really well, but others not so much, right? And it led to like inflation in the token, and at the same time a level of, let's say, value erosion, but also users like just came and went. So I think the incentive design is something which is like super important, which different teams need to look at. I think at Mantle we've got some very interesting incentive plan for developers, which revolve around not just sort of rewarding developers, but also in some sense like on-chain users, right? And this also becomes like super important for Mantle as well, because this also acts as a way for us to decentralize the DAOs further, right? So instead of having an airdrop scheme and a crazy level of incentives, I would much rather take those tokens, like the bit tokens, and put them into the hands of builders and actual users, right? So that the tokens end up in the hands of people who actually bring value to the network, versus just pure speculators, right? Which is like super important. And this is a longer path, right? And this is a tougher path. It requires us to talk to so many different projects, track so many different things at the same time. But at the end of the day, in the long term, it's so much more important to build a healthier economy. And I think what makes Mantle also unique, and why developers and users would want to work with us, like I said, is the going from all the way from zero to from project launch all the way to listing, right? Like I said, like majority of the ecosystems out there with doled out incentives could not offer this kind of a path to a project which is going from zero to ultimate distribution. I think at Mantle we can do that. So the ecosystem advantage which we have is something which is very unique, almost impossible to to replicate, which I think gives us like an edge, when it comes to ecosystem building. So I feel that we can do incentives better. We can offer a much, let's say, more fulfilling path to projects and to users. And which is kind of why I feel that we will we'll be able to mitigate some of those problems which we saw during the bull cycle.
I think one of the biggest problems with the layer 2s that launch a token right now is the current airdrop model.
Oh yeah.
If you look historically at what happens, people do the bare minimum just to
Yes.
qualify for the airport or the
Yeah.
airdrop, trying to figure out what exactly the requirements are. But they're not long-term participants in the ecosystem. They're not going to be long-time holders of the token. If you look at like the layer two, like for example, Optimism, it had like 1 day peak volume of
Yeah.
like the day after the airdrop where people were bridging funds to Optimism in order to claim their airdrop, sell their airdrop, and then bridge back. And that's not really a distribution of tokens you want. So it's an interesting problem to have, because you want individuals who are using the chain, using the ecosystem products to be rewarded, but there's always people that are going to try to like Sybil attack, game the system, make
100%.
a bunch of different accounts, make the bare minimum transactions in order to qualify for the airdrop. So you don't have to reveal if Mantle's going to do an airdrop or how they're going to distribute or anything, but do you see like a good way around this in order to reward the people that truly deserve the rewards for participating in the ecosystem?
100%. So what you're saying is totally correct, right? So we've seen this all the way from like, let's say, Uniswap to all the way till Optimism, and now we see a lot of activity on Arbitrum also, since there is some idea that there might
Rumored
be a
Arbitrum
token.
airdrop, yeah.
Yeah. So what we've seen again, time and time again with airdrop models is that they tend to be like you said, right? Like people tend to do the bare minimum to get the token, and then what happens, like I said, is that majority of the token, right, invariably ends up in the hands of speculators, right, who want to dump the token versus actual builders, or people who actually want to use the network or are interested in Web3. And at Mantle, what we want to do is we want to be very careful with these incentives. So instead of doing, let's say, blind airdrops, we would much rather figure out ways to sort of, let's say, help builders. So for example, what we're going to be doing is, we're going to be giving grants to builders to build on Mantle to help them sort of fund some of their costs of deploying. And what that means is you put the tokens in the hands of builders. Then what we would follow, we would follow up on this with, for example, incentivizing some of those projects which deploy and have good potential with another bounty, right, to sort of let's say airdrop or sort of find some way to give those tokens to the users of their projects, right? So you're seeing lots and lots of projects built, and then you sort of driving user growth to those projects, because at the end of the day, if you're a chain, if the projects on my chain succeed, I automatically succeed, right?
Yeah.
So for us, we want to bring this mentality rather than having some formula around airdrop and be like, okay, if you do this bare minimum things, you get this token, and then wow, you have instant distribution. Like that's not, like we've seen time and time again, not the best way. So putting the tokens in the hands of builders and of users of actual projects, achieves a much better outcome. And like I said, like this is more difficult because it requires you to do a lot of operational work, but we would much rather do that and build a healthier token economy than try and do like some sort of airdrop, get sort of some artificial pump, and then eventually which leads to nothing. And this is kind of where the bit token is also interesting, right? Because as a builder, like think of yourself as a builder, right? You get this token, you can use this token to sort of fund some of your costs, etc., and deploy. But this token is also a governance token, right? So if you're a builder and you have this token, you can go and put proposals on BitDAO for other projects you might have and participate in governance, right? So this token has a lot more utility baked in than possibly some of the other tokens you might get. And which is why, we feel that there's going to be strong like holder characteristics, right, for this token. Like it makes sense to hold the token versus, versus just sort of dumping it immediately. So I think Bit token is unique in that sense. Where
holding a certain amount of Bit token essentially gets you sort of access to VC funding, right? Because the DAO funds
like a huge pool of funding.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a huge pool of funding that's looking to be deployed,
100%.
and most Bit holders sort of have the same incentives aligned to improve the Bit ecosystem, which will be inclusive of Mantle. So if you're a developer on Mantle and you have a really good project, a good ecosystem, like a good user base going, and you need funding, instead of like reaching out to like third-party VCs, you could, if you hold enough Bit token, you could send a proposal to the DAO saying, we need X amount of funding, we want to do Y to improve our product to get X amount of more users, and it'll likely get voted up if it's a legitimate proposal, right? So
100%.
it makes sense to me that developers looking to build their product on a new chain would be heavily interested in using Mantle.
100%, and that's the behavior we plan to see, right? Like some developers may dump the token, but a serious developer who wants to develop like other new projects will immediately realize its value and be like, wow, this is interesting. Now I can go and get like more funding, I can build more projects, I can build larger teams, and and that's exactly the kind of builder we want to incentivize. And also we would have staking, like I said, even at the infrastructure layer, in data availability and other parts of the network. So they're like
Okay.
100 things you can do, like, with the bit token, participate in the ecosystem, stake it at the infrastructure level for crypto economic security, use it for governance. So and like I said, right, but when you put these tokens in the hands of the right people, who are in it for the long term, who want to add value to the network, who want to build, who want to sort of derive this utility from the network, it just leads to a healthier token economy. And that's kind of our goal at the end of the day.
Okay.
Whoa, Wage Cucking with J-Mo.
So, as head of ecosystem, I wanted to ask, what are the plans specifically for the Mantle ecosystem? I don't know if like some projects are in stealth that you can't talk about, or you can, but in general, like decentralized finance, NFTs, gaming, what's in store or what's currently in production for Mantle?
Got it. So two things, right? I want to quickly cover, right? So at Mantle, what we want to do is, a big focus for us, or a big agenda for us, is to grow the pie, right? So what we see in Web3 is that, like, so many projects keep fighting and start, sort of putting out incentives for the same set of people. We need to have more users. We need to have more developers. Like, we've seen this in the past bull cycle with billions of dollars spent. We barely have any on-chain traffic, like, maybe single-digit millions, etc. And we can't have, like, that happening in the next cycle. So big responsibility which we have at Mantle is to get in new developers, get in new users, and grow the pie, right? And one of the best ways of doing that is NFT and gaming, right? So for example, games and NFT projects, bring in, let's say, a type of user to the blockchain who may not otherwise, let's say, use blockchain technology, right? And this sort of allows us to add more users, right? And this benefits the entire ecosystem, not just Mantle, but everybody, right? Entirety of Web3, which is ultimately what is BitDAO's aim, right? To take Web3 forward. So this is a big focus. So there's going to be a lot of interesting sort of news and sort of projects around gaming. Also, if you look at BitDAO itself, you've got Game 7. We also have, like I said, Mirana Ventures' entire portfolio, which is an LP in Animoca, Spartan, Play Ventures, like so many different, funds. And so we've got access to a very large gaming ecosystem. And what we feel at Mantle is that if we build great infrastructure, if we bring the best technology in the market and put it in front of the developer, then we're going to see all of these different projects, deploying on Mantle. And all of them are talking to us. They all want to know what our plans are. So I think a big focus is there as well. The second big focus, of course, is at the end of the day, DeFi is very important because ecosystems are composable, right? Like ecosystems thrive when there is composability. When you can add DeFi elements to games, you can add gamification elements to DeFi, and then try and build a more holistic ecosystem. I think this is kind of where like Web3 differs from Web2, where instead of a king of the hill kind of way of thinking, what you actually have projects collaborating and building on top of each other, right? So we expect to see a lot of interesting traffic around DeFi as well, especially if we go ZK rollup, then you've got the security guarantee as well. And like I said, we've got liquidity, we've got the power to list a token. So all the other things which DeFi projects need to succeed, like, having a large community on day zero, like all of those things are there. So I think what we want to build at the end of the day is a generalized, like decentralized compute layer, which is blockchain, and you should be able to deploy anything. But I also wanted to, like I said, say that a responsibility for us, which comes from BitDAO's tenets itself, is to get new users. So definitely, gaming and NFT is going to be, a priority for us. And of course, DeFi, I think, would follow naturally if we bring the right technology and sort of bring liquidity and help those projects bootstrap. I think we're going to see a lot of action there. And then a composable ecosystem then, starts to sort of gain steam and grow faster and faster and build more and more value for the end user.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the blockchain games bring new users to Ethereum. Like if you look at something like Ronin, which was at one point the biggest layer 2 on Ethereum in terms of transaction volume. I think the number was like 60 to 70% of the users that were using Ronin were new first-time Ethereum users. Basically, they never used Ethereum before, and now they're using it just to interact with this game. So the gaming crowd and the general crypto DeFi crowd are almost two separate segments of the population. So if you do develop games on chain and they do gain popularity, it will drive a new user base to your chain.
And that's how the story started, right? Even for both of us, right? Like when we got our first tokens, then we started asking ourselves, right? Okay, what else can we do with it? And then you started going down the rabbit hole that way. So if you have gamers and you put tokens and NFTs in their hands, right, that's when the journey starts for them. So I think it's super important for us to sort of use NFT and gaming in such a way where you build value for the user, but you're also able to get like more users on chain, which is the ultimate goal at the end of the day for the entire ecosystem.
So would you say that most of the gaming projects you're looking to build on Mantle are still in stealth, they're still in the works, or are there gaming projects that you've reached out to currently on other chains that may want to move to a better chain for gaming?
So I would say I think just in the last maybe I think 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks in which we made the announcement, we've had like an internal pipeline of just pure games, like about close to about 100 odd games.
Oh wow. Uh-huh.
Which either we've reached out to or have reached out to us wanting to sort of know more about Mantle. Again, I don't want to take any specific names right now, so I would say stay
Uh-huh.
tuned for the
Sure,
announcements.
sure. Yeah,
But
of course, of course.
yeah, but that being said, like there's a huge amount of interest because I think
Yeah.
that's what even games realize, right? Like you see, they look at our ecosystem. They're like, man, like these guys have users from day zero, right? A typical
Mhm.
blockchain will go through this, path, right? You put the token out there, you build a community, you do. Like for us, all of that is already done. There's already a
Yeah.
big community. There's ZK
Uh-huh.
DAO, Game 7. There's already and like Bybit users. So
Uh-huh.
a big community already exists. So as a project, we have a jumping off point. So a game is like, they do marketing. They've got a big number of users. We get users on day zero. They've got ecosystem grants. We're also putting together a $150 million ecosystem fund to invest in like ecosystem projects. They've got an exchange as well. So all the tick marks are there, right? So if you want to look at a long term play where we want to build value, build more games, do more interesting things, like it just makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And that's how builders are looking at it, and that's kind of where a lot of the interest is coming from. That's what's driving a lot of these conversations. And I think as we go towards mainnet, we're going to see like a huge amount of adoption and a number of projects going live with us. So so pretty exciting times for us.
Yeah. It sounds good. On the DeFi side of things, when the chain gets out of testnet and into mainnet, are you looking to have your own in-house DeFi protocols, or are they going to be, sort of versions of the current big players like Curve, Aave, Compound, Uniswap, stuff like that?
So I think of course we would want to work with these projects and have them deploy on Mantle. At the end of the day, DeFi is less about tokens, more about community, right? And what these projects, when I look at them, it was not so much about like Aave as in the Aave token or Curve as in Curve or V Curve. It's more about the communities which they represent, right? So we don't, as such, we don't have plans to sort of start building out our own protocols. We're permissionless, like anyone can deploy anything. I would much rather create more interesting incentives for projects to deploy versus trying to do it ourselves, because there's only so much we can do from our side. So it just makes sense to leverage the community, and so that's kind of what we want to do on the DeFi side. I think DeFi has become so interesting, right, from the last bull cycle where we had all of this pump dump type of tokens and all of these 100 different yield farm on top of a yield farm, and those kind of projects,
the leverage yield farm, the governance tokens, the
ultra level leverage, and 8,000% APR and all of that. But you can see today that the conversation has sort of turned right in the bear market, and now finally you see the right kind of questions being asked, right? Like when I talk to a protocol today, like the first question I have is, how do you generate fees, right? Like, are you running a proper, like, are you actually solving something for the user? Because if you're solving something for the user, there's some utility there, you can generate fees, right? So we see now, like the community asking the right questions to projects, which is like how much fees versus asking when moon, like which is kind of the conversation in the previous bull cycle. So I think we're going to see a much more robust and a sort of a much more utility based DeFi ecosystem in 2023 and beyond. The investors are smarter now. The retail investors are so much smarter now. They have access to so much more on-chain information. So I feel that projects, DeFi projects, if they want to survive and continue to thrive, like you need to find ways to generate fees. You need to find new ways to
you need to find like long-term sustainability, right?
100%.
It can't be these pools that essentially generate quick money for a certain number of people.
And you got to be decentralized, right? There has to be a community thinking sort of approach towards building DeFi, right? And I think projects which sort of go by this ethos will be able to survive for the long term, right? So when we talk to DeFi projects, like these are the kind of questions which we have, that that how you guys doing this, how you guys doing that, and then from their motivations, we're able to figure out how we can support the team in the best way, right? So for example, do teams need help with, let's say, day zero liquidity provisioning so that they can bootstrap, right? So that slippage is low, right? So that for the user it's a better experience. Do we need to, for example, help them build community? So is it a marketing and communication problem, right? Do we need to sort of do other things to help these projects, maybe work with them and help them figure out new ways to generate fees, for example, connect them to other projects within the ecosystem depending on the use case. So DeFi has to be sort of grown very organically. It works in terms of layers where you have your borrowing, your basic lending and borrowing, and then you've got like sort of options, perps, etc. So right from the bottom, layer by layer, the risk sort of keeps going up, and sort of the yield keeps going up. And this is kind of how you need to build a DeFi ecosystem. So that's kind of how we look at that problem, and that at every layer, the different problems which need to be solved, like we have the ecosystem to solve those problems. So I think DeFi is going to be like super interesting, I think, in 2023, because finally, we've gotten to the point where, the right conversation is happening. And this is kind of when, long-term value gets built.
So in the future, would you envision Mantle to have everything from perps to options to synthetics, specifically on their chain, like basically the brunt of DeFi? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, if for example, so currently, we're deep into testing, let's say, ZK rollups, right? And we're looking at different performance parameters. I think if the performance parameters hit, if our internal research teams come to us and tell us that, guys, like, it's working, and that, these are the performance metrics, and if the performance is there, of course, there is no reason why you can't bake all of this into your chain, right? Considering that all the other problems are solved. The ecosystem side, community / liquidity / listing, like, all of those problems are already solved. So as long as, the chain performance is on par, you can build virtually anything and make it successful. So that's kind of, how we're thinking about what we need to do, which is why this technology decision is super important, right? And which is where we're spending a lot of time and not jumping the gun and trying to sort of make fun announcements or do something like this, but really taking it step by step, having the tech teams and the research teams compile a report, because it's not just that I can choose, like, oh, we should do ZK rollups. It has to be a community vote. You see, when we are getting all of this information and doing this research, we'll compile a report and then we'll put it on the forum, like telling the community that, okay, listen, we've done our research. These are our findings. What do you think we should do? And then there will be a vote.
I think that's the beauty of a DAO versus anything else, is like the people with skin in the game, the people that have access to the tokens, hold the tokens, also have access to the forum, can look through all 100%. The propositions, can actively discuss all the propositions. So it becomes a collaborative effort with everyone involved, especially with people with like risk in the whole project itself.
People with skin in the game should be the ones to decide. And at the end of the day, when you have critical decisions, right, regarding the chain's future, which is choosing, like, between, let's say, two different approaches of solving, for decentralized compute or possibly other decisions in the future, like, we want to set the precedent from day zero that we're going to involve the community, right? And as we give out more and more incentives and, we build, a big community, a big ecosystem, the DAO will become more and more decentralized, slowly over a period of time. The governance will become stronger, more interesting proposals will come to the fore, right? And eventually this is kind of how, the ecosystem will continue to, not just gain value, but build new value.
Yeah, for sure.
For the user. Yeah, so for every
I think especially if you have a larger distribution of the token with active developers or active builders, it would lead to like there's going to be more propositions like within the forums, and there's going to be more discussion rather than like idle token holders that don't participate in DAO governance. And then the DeFi and gaming, I think, in the future will sort of work together, because a lot of these games, on-chain games, will have like a token or several tokens or NFTs, and DeFi sort of enables all of that, right? Where you can trade with each other, you can provide liquidity, you can eventually maybe you could have synthetic tokens, or you can have leverage trading and stuff like that. So the two communities, even though they might be completely separate, like still rely a bit on each other, right? The gaming community still needs somewhere to trade their tokens, and any DeFi protocol would welcome the outside liquidity of any token, just as long as they're paying fees on the protocol. 100%. So it seems like it's two things that would work well together. Before I let you go today, wondering if you had any specific launch dates for the Mantle layer 1, or sorry, the layer 2 mainnet, and also like right now or maybe in the future, how viewers or listeners of this could get involved with Mantle.
Of course. So in terms of launch dates, we have we've got a broader sort of a timeline. So end of Q2, Q3 is kind of what we're broadly looking at, simply because we want to do the research, right? And then once the research is done, the community has to vote. So there's a bit of a delta time there, right? And we could, like, and we don't want to be the team which takes unilateral decisions. Like, we have to involve the community at the end of the day. This is for whom we're building project. So this is kind of why the timelines are, like, let's say, a little broader than possibly a specific launch date. But as we get closer to that timeline, of course, we would then firm up on a date and then communicate that to the community, right? And then move towards sort of all the different things we need to do to go live. So that's as far as the timeline is concerned. For the community to get involved, of course, I'd just love it for people to just get involved in our forums. Currently, like, while the bit community is fairly diverse, like, like what we want to do is we want to get more and more, members into our community to be active participants, to sort of help us make better decisions. So just get involved with the bit community, join our Discord, join our Telegram channels, get involved with the discussion. And I think, that's the best way for folks to get into Mantle, and at the same time, become participants of the greater bit community, because that's kind of the beauty of DAOs, right? Like technology grows vertically in a stack, but a DAO grows horizontally, right? With the number of participants. So
Yeah,
the more
exactly.
people who are part of our DAO, the more stronger we become, the stronger our governance becomes. So, and the better the governance, the better projects which will come to the fore, right? And better direction we can give to the liquidity which we have, and to all the different ecosystem advantages which we've sort of put together. So I think for the community to get involved, just join our forums, join our governance, and I think, with the kind of moving parts which we have now, and with this new infrastructure piece, like, I think that's the sky's the limit, right? When it comes to the amazing things which we can build, and take the ecosystem forward, get new users, get people on chain, and really take, like, Web3 to the next level.
Absolutely.
With new kinds of thinking as well, like the collaborative model, and sort of bring these kind of new things in front of the community.
Absolutely. I would love to have you on in like maybe like 6 to 9 months to reflect on this podcast and look at the
100%.
ecosystem at that point. But I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. It was a
Absolutely.
good talk, and I hope we can talk more in the future about the Mantle and the bit ecosystem.
Well,
Thanks for
absolutely.
coming
Look forward to our next conversation. And again, once again, thank you so much for having me.
on. Thank you.